Hello and welcome to another Sheriff of Sodium video podcast, Non-Profiteering, the ECFMG's Finances by the Numbers. Today we're going to discuss the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates, or ECFMG. Now, if you went to medical school outside of the United States, you know exactly what the ECFMG is and what they do. And if so, I hope you'll indulge me for just a minute while I provide just a very brief background for the other members of the audience. If you go to residency in the United States, you have to have either graduated from a United States medical school or you have to have certification from the ECFMG. You cannot match into a U.S. residency program unless the ECFMG has certified that your education, your diploma is valid, and that you've met certain standards to ensure that the people who enter U.S.-based residency programs are adequately trained when they show up. It's an important job, and it puts the ECFMG in a very privileged position as the gatekeepers to graduate medical education for anyone, U.S. citizen or non-U.S. citizen, who goes to medical school outside of the United States. But if you followed me for any length of time, you'll know that I've grown deeply suspicious of certain organizations that have these monopolistic powers over medical education. Even though many of these organizations, such as the ECFMG, are configured as nonprofit corporations, they often do very handsome business in performing the role that they do for society. And so today I'm going to tell you just how handsome the ECFMG's business model has become. And I'm going to tell you a story through the raw numbers themselves. And this is the first number that got me interested in this story, $900. That's the price tag that the ECFMG has charged this year for its pathways for international medical graduates to become certified without taking the USMLE Step 2 CS exam. And here a little bit of backstory is again necessary. As part of ECFMG certification, since the 1990s, the ECFMG has required that applicants pass a test of clinical skills. Since 2004, that test of clinical skills has been the USMLE Step 2 CS exam. So when the Step 2 CS exam got suspended earlier this spring due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it created a real problem for the ECFMG. How are they going to vouch for people's clinical skills when there wasn't a clinical skills exam to make their applicants take? Their solution was a workaround. Instead of allowing all international medical graduates to take a test and demonstrate their individual merit, the ECFMG carved up certain groups of international medical graduates who would be expected on the basis of their pedigree or experience to have passed the USMLE Step 2 CS exam on their first attempt, if the exam were being offered, that is. Now, if you're interested in the logic that went into these pathways, I describe it a little bit more fully on my website, and I have in the past on Twitter as well. But basically, they came up with 5 different groups of international medical graduates who, provided that they hadn't failed the USMLE exams, Step 1 or Step 2 CK portions more than once, and provided that they could pass a test of spoken English proficiency, which is expensive and not widely available. Then, if you fit one of these 5 pathways, you could be certified without taking USMLE Step 2 CS. Now, the 5 pathways included physicians who were already licensed to practice in another country, or those who had passed a Step 2 CS-like exam in another country, like the clinical skills exams in Canada or the United Kingdom or New Zealand. It also included schools who have access to U.S. Federal student loans, which includes a number of schools that attract many U.S. citizen international medical graduates, including the Big Four of Caribbean medical schools. It also included certain U.S. medical schools like Duke and Cornell that have international branch campuses. But before we get too far in the weeds talking about all these pathways, let's get back to that $900 charge. Because the more I thought about it, the more curious that number seemed. So after a week of being ignored, I called them out on Twitter. Hi, ECFMG. I'm trying to understand how your organization sets fees. Last week I sent an email, but have not yet received a response. Planning to write about this soon, and would very much like to understand your policies. Now, this tweet started to get a little bit of attention. And though I am sure it is by coincidence alone, somehow my email from the previous week got resurrected from the bottom of someone's email, and I got a reply. And what that reply lacked in any sort of substantive response to my questions, it made up for in politeness, and they very kindly replied that all answers would be revealed soon. They were going to be commenting on this matter soon on their website. And I pushed again and I said, how did you arrive at this $900 fee? How do you arrive at any of your fees? What is your policy for determining how much to charge for your services? And to that, I got no response. And so I got ready to write about it. And I gave them one last chance to reply. And I sent an email and I said, hey, I'm about to write about this. I wanted to give you one last chance to comment upon it. And I received a terse reply that, again, all answers would be in their own statement. Now, if you couldn't tell by the tone of my voice, this irked me a little bit. The lack of responsiveness to a good faith inquiry, it doesn't look good. It doesn't feel right. If you cannot produce a policy that explains how your organization sets fees, then it tells me very strongly that you have one of two situations going on. One is that you have no policy and that you just set your fees however you damn well please. The second possibility is that you have a policy, but that reporting that policy publicly makes you look worse than just stonewalling a good faith inquiry. Either one ain't real good. Look, the ECFMG is not under any personal obligation to respond to me, and so this is not personal. I'm just a guy. I'm not an international medical graduate. I don't have any business to do with them. They don't have to respond to me. But to me, the fact that you would choose to not respond is reflective of a toxic corporate culture. These monopolies in medical education occupy these privileged positions. They are, by the literal definition of the term, coercive monopolies. They can charge whatever prices they choose to charge, and consumers are forced to pay them. There is no threat of competition whatsoever. And with that power of being a coercive monopoly, with that power comes a certain responsibility to behave in an ethical manner, to have some accountability to your shareholders, to be able to articulate how your fees are set and why, to be able to demonstrate when called to do so that your fees are set at the bare minimum that your organization could scrape by with because you're here to do a service for the public. And on all those areas, the ECFMG's stonewalling fell way short. And so I began to look a little bit more closely at their finances. And I wrote the first part of my series on the ECFMG and posted it to my website, ECFMG Finances Part 1 on Purell and Profiteering. I'll link to the article in the show notes, but I generally made the argument that the ECFMG's determination of this $900 fee seems uncomfortably analogous to the same price markup that certain businesses made on Purell and other essential goods during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Within hours of publishing that piece, the ECFMG's often promised and long awaited statement on pathway fees was published on their website. I won't read it to you. I will link to it in the show notes because I think the thing speaks for itself. Instead, I'll spend the rest of this podcast sharing with you some numbers. And while I will provide some editorialization on all these figures, I think that they too largely speak for themselves. So with no further ado, let me show you the ECFMG's finances by the numbers. Our first number is zero. Zero corresponds to the number of years since 2001 in which the ECFMG has reported a financial loss. While other businesses have been subject to economic downturns or the global financial crisis, the ECFMG has built a recession-proof business model. In fact, I strongly suspect that the ECFMG's run of uninterrupted financial success goes back much farther than 2001, but I could only get their tax records from 2001 to the present. Our next number is 151,818,498. This corresponds to the net assets of the ECFMG in 2018, the last year for which their tax records are available. $151.8 million. That's the net worth of the ECFMG. And over $108 million of that total is contained in the ECFMG's master trust. It's essentially in financial securities that are just sitting around waiting for a rainy day. And that makes reading the ECFMG's statement on their $900 pathways fees a little bit curious. And I promised I wouldn't read it to you, but I just can't help myself. There's one passage that I just have to quote verbatim. As they justify this $900 fee to certify international medical graduates this year, they said, in establishing the pathways, ECFMG moved quickly and aggressively to build a new, comprehensive operational infrastructure, including a new technology platform. Although the fees associated with the pathways partially cover the cost of this investment and ongoing implementation, they do not offset 2020 and 2021 operating losses resulting from the suspension of USMLE Step DCS. I gotta pull myself together and dab my eyes and turn off the sad violin music. Because certainly the idea that the ECFMG might have to dip into their net assets, they might have to dip into that master trust to cover their operating losses. Oh, it's just the thought of it is enough to bring tears to my eyes. 3.4 years. Our next number is 3.4 years. 3.4 years corresponds to the length of time that the ECFMG could cover expenses for the USMLE program just with funds in their master trust. Now, look, don't get me wrong, the USMLE is an expensive program to administer. In 2018 alone, the ECFMG spent $31.5 million just to register applicants for the test. But still, even then, they could give away the USMLE for free to every single international medical graduate who wanted to register for it from now until 2024, just with the funds that they have in their master trust. Of course, they're not going to do that. Rather than going too deeply into their own pockets, they chose to put their hand into their customers' pockets just a little bit deeper. Our next number is 9,431. And that is the number of international medical graduates that were certified by the ECFMG in the year 2018. I'm showing you this figure to give you some sense of the ECFMG's customer base. Because you could hear some of the statistics that I've provided to you already, like the fact that the ECFMG has turned a profit every single year since 2001. You could hear those statistics and be tempted to say, well, maybe, they're just certifying more people each year. Maybe they're doing more work and they're getting paid for it. I mean, what's the problem with that? And although not all international medical graduates who pursue ECFMG certification are successful, the number who ultimately are successful, I think, provides some reasonable standard measurement that we can use from year to year to figure out how many customers the ECFMG is serving. And maybe their business is growing. Maybe that explains their revenue gains. Only it doesn't. This bar chart shows the number of ECFMG certificates issued from 2006 to 2018. And as you can see, the numbers are pretty steady, if not down slightly. The ECFMG is not serving any more customers. So why are they making so much money? Our next figure is 3.7 times. 3.7 times is the factor by which the ECFMG's program service revenue has grown since 2001. Now, program service revenue corresponds to the money that the ECFMG takes in, not from investments, but from the actual programs that they provide, the programs that serve their tax-exempt mission. And that revenue has grown almost fourfold since 2001, despite the fact that the ECFMG's customer pipeline has been about the same. Here's another way of looking at this with real dollars. You can see that you go back to 2001 and the lowly ECFMG was only hauling in revenues of around 20 million a year. By 2018, that figure was pushing 80 million. So how does an organization with a stable number of customers each year manage to increase their revenue almost fourfold? Well, it's pretty easy, really. You just have to squeeze almost 4 times as much money out of every single one of your customers. And how do they do that? Well, let's take a look at some other figures, like this one, $965. $965 corresponds to the amount that an international medical graduate spends to register for the USMLE Step 1 or Step 2 CK exams. In comparison, U.S. medical students pay over $300 less. They pay $645 for the same test. Why? A few years ago, when I started looking into the USMLE program, I asked someone this question, and they pointed out to me that one does not simply take the USMLE exam. In order to take the exam, in order to have the illustrious privilege of sitting for this exam, you first must establish that you are eligible to take it, that you are a student of a bona fide medical school. And that's much easier to do for U.S. medical students than it is for certain international medical graduates. In fact, the ECFMG is fond of saying that by saying that it's harder to verify the credentials of someone from India than it is someone from Indiana. So maybe it's just that there's $320 of credential verification that goes into and justifies this higher cost. Maybe. Or maybe not, because our next figure is $90. $90 corresponds to the cost of credential verification through the ECFMG's electronic portfolio of international credentials. This is a program that the ECFMG has created to verify credentials for international medical graduates who are going to practice in another country, not the United States. And guess what? It's a profitable program. The service line that Epic is included in on their tax forms is reported as having generated over $5.2 million in profit in 2018. So if you can profitably verify credentials for just $90, where's the rest of that $320 upcharge coming from? Hmm. I mean, there's got to be a reason for it, right? Maybe it's because of the difficulties in administering the test in foreign countries. I mean, the ECFMG administers the USMLE exam all around the world. Surely that's got to be expensive, right? Right? And that brings us to our next figure, $195. $195 is the international test delivery surcharge that the ECFMG charges if you want to take the USMLE Step 1 exam in countries like Germany, Taiwan, Denmark, Korea, etc. If you want to take Step 1 in Kenya or Nepal, you would pay $160. If you want to take USMLE in Japan, you would pay $385 for Step 1 or $435 for USMLE Step 2 CK. In other words, to the extent that it is more expensive to administer the USMLE in countries other than the United States, the ECFMG has themselves covered. Our next figure is $300. $300 applies to the difference in registration costs for the USMLE Step 2 CS exam for IMGs who pay $1,600 and US students who pay $1,300. And again, this is a curious disparity because back before the Step 2 CS exam was suspended, IMGs and US medical graduates took the USMLE Step 2 CS exam side by side in the same 5 testing centers, all of which were located in the United States, all of which are run by a partnership between the NBME and the ECFMG. It is the exact same test in the exact same centers with the exact same patients, and yet one costs $300 more. And please don't let me catch you saying that this is because of credential verification. I think that we've debunked that myth by the fact that the ECFMG can profitably, they can turn a handsome profit by verifying credentials at $90 a pop. In other words, rather than setting the price point by what the test costs, the ECFMG seems to charge whatever the market will bear. And if you needed more evidence of this last point, then I would direct you to the USMLE Step 3 exam. Unlike for Step 1 and Step 2, where registrants have to go through the NBME for US medical students or the ECFMG for foreign medical graduates, all registrants for the Step 3 exam go through the Federation of State Medical Boards. And somehow, the FSMB manages to charge the exact same price for both international medical graduates and US students. But let's move on to our next figure, 2.7%. 2.7% corresponds to the annual average increase in registration cost for the USMLE Step 2 CS exam from 2010 to 2020. Now, a smart person might choose to defend the ECFMG's continuously increasing price by pointing out that this small increase each year parallels the average annual inflation rate over that time period. But a smarter person would question why any increase in Step 2 CS examination fees was necessary when the ECFMG's revenue was growing at more than 3 times the rate of inflation. Again, the ECFMG charges whatever the market will bear. If you expect a small increase every year, the ECFMG is going to give you one. Now here's a good number, $27,313,414. That's the total profit, and by profit I mean revenue minus expenses for the ECFMG's USMLE program in 2018. Yeah, that's right. The ECFMG took in 58.8 million in revenue, and they had only 31.5 million in expenses. Not bad, huh? But I wonder how that amount of profit compares to the NBME's profit from administering the USMLE to US test takers. I mean, I would like to know how those numbers compare, wouldn't you? $17,756,094. This is the total profit, again, revenue minus expenses, for the NBME's USMLE program in 2018. You can pull this figure right off of the NBME's Form 990 tax return. In 2018, they had $113 million of USMLE revenue, but they had over $95 million of expenses in running the program itself, leaving a profit of $17.7 million. I want the significance of this figure to really set in. The ECFMG, by selling the NBME's tests, turned a profit of $27.3 million. The NBME, selling their own tests, made a profit of only $17.7 million. Yes, that is correct. In 2018, the ECFMG made more money from the USMLE than the NBME did, and it isn't even close. The ECFMG had half as much revenue, and they made 54% more profit than the National Board of Medical Examiners selling the same tests. Perhaps now it's becoming clear why the ECFMG had trouble articulating how they set their prices. Let's move on to our next number, $514. $514 would be the theoretical price of the USMLE Step 1 or Step 2 CK exams if the ECFMG sold them at cost, meaning if they did not make any profit on the exam, theoretically, they could sell the tests instead of at $965 a piece, they could sell them at $514 and go home at the end of the day having broken even. Now, I do say theoretical because it's important to note that the ECFMG makes money on all kinds of fees associated with the USMLE. If you want to change testing regions, that'd be $85. You want to extend your scheduling eligibility period, $90, please. If you want to reschedule an exam, it could be as much as $604. And I'm sure that all these ancillary charges probably make up a handsome contribution to their profit margin. Let's keep going. Our next number, $145. This is the cost to apply for ECFMG certification, which basically involves setting up an online electronic account. But interestingly, seemingly the cost of setting up such an account has become just much more expensive lately because the price has gone up over 240% since 2013 when this same service cost just $60. Our next figure is $70. That's the price that the ECFMG charges to print out a paper copy of your USMLE transcript. Because I guess, their printer's much nicer than yours. $80, however, is the price for an electronic USMLE transcript. If you would like the ECFMG to send your USMLE transcript to the electronic residency application service, it will cost you $80, $10 more than sending a paper transcript to send what amounts to an encrypted email to ERIS. Because, that's how computers work, I guess. $145. This is the price that the ECFMG charges for an ERIS token. That's the Electronic Residency Application Service. If you want to apply to residency programs, you have to set up an account, and it's going to cost you $145. But this, too, seems to be a very profitable program for the ECFMG because their IRS Form 990 indicates revenues of $4.9 million versus just expenses of $2.9 million. So they're taking in $2 million of profit from selling these. Now, why the ECFMG cannot sell ERIS tokens and transmit USMLE transcripts at their own cost, and instead has to sell them with a 70% markup, is completely beyond me. Our next figure is $945,450. And this corresponds to the total compensation received by the ECFMG's president and CEO in the year 2018. Now, wait. Before you get all riled up, let me assure you that the ECFMG's CEO, he's working hard for his money because the Form 990 tells us that he is putting in 40 hours a week in the service of the ECFMG. Now, in all seriousness, the ECFMG's CEO is only getting paid what top executives at similarly sized corporations get paid. The ECFMG, in fact, hires an independent compensation consultant to ensure as much. And they look at other organizations that have revenue of 80 million a year, and they say, "Hey, their executives are making this much. I mean, we have to provide this much, or we can't recruit the top talent." I call BS. Look, I've long been critical of the need to pay nonprofit executives so handsomely. I do not think we are in any danger of Silicon Valley startups and hot new businesses headhunting away all the top talent from the NBME and the ECFMG. Look, I call BS on all that. Does it really take a CEO with such exceptional business acumen to guide an organization to financial success when that organization has zero competitors and they have a steady stream of customers who have no other option but to buy the products at whatever price they're sold? Look, you could cut the ECFMG CEO's salary by 50 or 75%, and I promise you will have no shortage of visionary and capable applicants to lead the organization. And to be honest, if all you really care about is the organization turning a profit, you could probably go even lower than that. Here's a hint. You could just hire the manager from your local movie theater. You know who I'm talking about, the guy who figured out that you could charge 12 bucks for a box of M&Ms or Sour Patch Kids once you get inside the theater doors. Trust me, that guy will catch on to the ECFMG's business model very quickly. All right, let's move on. Actually, let's not move on. Actually, I'd like to share one more thing that I find very troubling about the ECFMG's president's compensation. And that is this. It's not just this independent consultant who weighs in on how much the ECFMG's president should earn. In fact, the ECFMG has their own executive compensation committee. And every year they review the CEO's, quote, performance, end quote. And they, quote, recommend a salary increase percentage as appropriate given the performance of the CEO and the financial results of the ECFMG for that year. Does anyone else find this last part a little bit troubling? That the chief executive officer of a nonprofit corporation receives the promise of greater compensation if the organization turns more profit? I do. And let me be very clear about something. Nothing I'm saying is intended to be an ad hominem attack on the CEO of the ECFMG. I've never met the man, and for all I know, he is the only individual on planet Earth that has the unique skill set that's needed to successfully guide the ECFMG to financial success in the current business environment. For all I know, that could be true. But even if you believe that to be the case, setting up an incentive for an organization that is a nonprofit organization to make more and more money by putting more money in your pocket when you make decisions that lead to the organization making more money, that's a bad system. That is a system that is guaranteed iteratively to move farther and farther away from its true nonprofit mission. And that brings us to our final figure, 501c3. That's the section of the Internal Revenue Code that gives the ECFMG its tax-exempt status. You see, to be exempt from paying federal income tax, an organization has to meet certain requirements, and they have to commit to certain standards of transparency about their finances. That's why I was able to get all the figures that I've shown you here. I wasn't showing you some kind of big secret. You can pull the same numbers that I have from any number of websites like GuideStar or CauseIQ or ProPublica's Nonprofit Explorer. And there's a reason that these financial records are open to public inspection. That reason is accountability. Because it is us, the public stakeholders in these organizations' nonprofit missions, we are supposed to be looking at their numbers. We are supposed to be ensuring that the dollars that they spend and take in are aligned with their mission. So if any of these figures rub you the wrong way, I would encourage you to do your part and speak out. The least you can do is talk it up with your peers or colleagues or share it on social media. If you want to do better than that, write to the ECFMG's Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees is the ECFMG's unpaid governance, and they're intended to counterbalance the paid executive leadership. So send them a message. Send them some of the figures from this presentation. All the people on the Board of Trustees are people who have earned a good reputation in academic medicine over decades. Let them know that reputation is at risk, that they're being tarnished by their association with an organization that can't even articulate how it sets fees. And by any simple look at their finances, the fees that they're charging seem to be well in excess of what they should charge. Let them know. Or write to the ACGME, because it's the Accreditation Council on Graduate Medical Education that ultimately gives the ECFMG their power. See, the ACGME requires that all residency programs, as a condition of accreditation, that they only accept ECFMG certified IMGs. If you want the ECFMG to be accountable, let them get a letter from the ACGME saying, if you're not able to lower your costs or justify your costs or constrain your meteoric financial growth, then maybe we're going to let a competitor organization certify some IMGs. See how quickly things change then. Or if you're a U.S. citizen international medical graduate or just a concerned citizen, write to your congressperson. See if you can get a congressperson interested in this issue. Have them send a letter to the ECFMG saying, I've been hearing from my constituents about this, and it seems like the prices that you're charging have no basis in reality. And if you're having trouble regulating yourself, then guess what? The federal government can help. And watch how quickly things change. Look, the ECFMG performs an important role in American medical practice, but they also occupy a very privileged market position. They fit the literal definition of the term coercive monopoly. They're immune from market forces, and they're also seemingly immune from the pressures of being shamed on the internet. But there is a social compact that goes along with being a nonprofit organization. There's some basic accountability that should have to take place, and the ECFMG should at the very least have to articulate how it sets its fees. This is America, and if you think that the ECFMG should be accountable, then please speak up. That's all I've got. Thanks for listening.